The jury finally heard directly from George Zimmerman today in his second-degree murder trial. George Zimmerman has pled not guilty, claiming self-defense. And while it's still unknown whether he will take the witness stand in his own defense, the prosecution allowed jurors to hear George Zimmerman telling his side of the story by playing a videotaped reenactment of the incident. The Sanford Police Department recorded this video the day after George Zimmerman shot and killed Trayvon Martin.
I was walking back to my truck, and then when I got to right about here, he yelled from behind me, to the side of me. He said, "Yo, you got a problem?" And I turned around, and I said, "No, I don't have a problem, man."
Where was he at?
He was about there, but he was walking towards me.
This direction here.
Yes, sir. Like I said, I was already past that, so I didn't see exactly where he came from, but he was about where you were.
Okay.
And I said, "No, I don't have a problem." And I went to go grab my cell phone, but I left it in a different pocket. I looked down in my pant pocket, and he said, "You got a problem now." And then he was here, and he punched me in the face.
Right here?
Right, it's about up around here.
Okay.
To be honest, I don't remember exactly. I stumbled, and I fell down, and he pushed me down. Somehow he got on top of me.
On the grass or on the cement?
It was more over towards here. I think I was trying to push him away from me, and then he got on top of me somewhere around here. And that's when I started screaming for help. I started screaming help as loud as I could. And then is when he grabbed me. Oh, I tried to sit up, and that's when he grabbed me by the head and tried to slam my head down. And
Were you on the cement?
no, my body was on the grass. My head was on the cement.
You can see your face like this on this one?
Yes, sir. Okay. That's as best as I could feel through my jacket. I felt like my body was on the grass and my head was on the cement, and he just kept slamming it. And I kept yelling, "Help, help, help," as loud as I could. He put his hand on his nose, on my nose, and his other hand on my mouth. He said, "Shut the up." And then I tried squirming again, because all I could think about was when he was hitting my head against it, felt like my head was going to explode, and I thought I was going to lose consciousness. So I tried to squirm so that I could get, because he only had a small portion of my head on the concrete. So I tried to squirm off the concrete. And when I did that, somebody here opened the door. And I said, "Help me, help me." And they said, "I'll call 911. I said, "No, help me. I need help." And I don't know what they did, but that's when my jacket moved up, and I had my firearm on my right side hip. My jacket moved up, and he saw it. I feel like he saw it. He looked at it, and he said, "You're going to die tonight." And he reached for it, but he reached, like I felt his arm going down to my side, and I grabbed it, and I just grabbed my firearm, and I shot him one time.
The prosecution's key witness today was Chris Serino, the lead investigator in the Zimmerman case. Serino originally recommended that George Zimmerman be charged with manslaughter 2 days after that walkthrough. Serino and Detective Doris Singleton questioned Zimmerman again. The prosecution played that video for the jury.
Ever say to him, "I'm neighborhood watch"?
No.
Did it not occur to you?
I always said, "I don't have a problem," and I started backing away from him.
But you kind of didn't have a problem. That's why you were pulling her, right? You had a concern with him.
I was scared.
You were scared to tell them that you had a concern? That you were neighborhood watch? You were afraid to tell him that?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but these are the questions I'm asking.
No, I
I'm
understand.
an answer.
I was
It
scared.
seemed like the perfect opportunity to say, "Look, I'm neighborhood watch. I don't recognize you. Are you staying here?"
Like I said, he came up out of nowhere. I didn't even see him. I was walking back to my car thinking that I was going to meet a police officer there. So when he popped up, he just caught me off guard. I didn't think that I told him.
But can you see how that would maybe frighten him? You've been following him now for a whole bar?
What do you mean, on foot or?
Yeah, you're watching him. Okay.
I didn't.
He makes it clear to you. He sees you. He walks up to your car, correct?
Yes.
He was making
I didn't know if he was doing that or he was doubling back what he was doing.
Later, Serino reviewed George Zimmerman's claim that Trayvon Martin tried to smother him.
Prior to you shooting him, he was on you, correct? Okay. And you were able to reach into your holster?
Yes.
Okay. He shot at point blank range. He was on top of you, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And remember that yelling, nobody came out to help you. And I can't pinpoint where you were smothered. That's the problem I'm having. And nobody's saying they saw him smothering you. People were saying they saw someone on top of you, but they didn't see about the smothering part. So.
When we're listening to the screaming, it doesn't sound like it's a hesitation of the screaming. It sounds like it's continuous. And someone who knows, it's going to stop. But we don't hear it stop.
We'll have analysis of all of today's testimony next.
You had an issue of whether or not his rendition of getting hit dozens of times were supported by the forensic evidence of his injuries, correct?
In my view, yes.
Yeah.
They were lacking.
Would you agree that there were numerous different bruisings and injuries on both sides of his scalp first?
There were injuries.
Okay.
However, based on the way I'd view him as a major crimes investigator who's seen injuries a lot worse than that, I didn't consider them life-threatening.
That was defense attorney Mark O'Mara cross-examining Chris Serino on day 6 of testimony in the trial of George Zimmerman. Today, we heard George Zimmerman's story as he told it to police on the night of the shooting and as he retold it during a second interview with the lead detective, Chris Serino, days later. Joining me now, Yamiche Alcindor, a reporter for USA Today who was in the courtroom today, and Faith Jenkins, a former criminal prosecutor. Faith, that last point that we just heard Chris Serino make, where he said he didn't consider George Zimmerman's injuries life-threatening, that could be a crucial element here for the jury because you don't get to shoot somebody in this country because you get punched in the nose.
That's right, and that's exactly what the prosecutors are going to argue. One of the questions the jurors will have to answer is, are George Zimmerman's injuries significant enough to justify shooting Trayvon Martin? We know he has some injuries, so we know there was some contact, but did he turn a fist fight into a gunfight just because he could? The state is going to argue that's exactly what he did. A reasonable person in his situation could not have believed that they were about to suffer death or serious physical injury based on the injuries that he suffered. The state's going to argue they're just not significant enough, and they're going to ask the jurors to decide that George Zimmerman did not act reasonably when he shot and killed Trayvon Martin.
Yamiche, every jury wants to hear from the defendant, but this is a case where it's speculation is running higher every day that this defendant may not testify. This may be the jury's only chance to actually listen to him tell his story is via this video. What was your impression in the courtroom today about the way the jury followed the video testimony, the video presentation?
So, like you said, the jury may not hear from George Zimmerman. So this was their real chance to hear George Zimmerman. He's been in court, but this is their first chance to really think about what he said about that night. And usually they're leaning in, they're taking notes. This time, I didn't see any pens moving. I saw everyone's head staring at the projector. I saw everyone staring at George Zimmerman telling police officers what happened that night. And the whole jury was just looking at this projector for a really long time. And you know, there were at least an hour probably of recordings of George Zimmerman, and the whole time the jury was focused on him. They were really, really paying attention, close attention, in a way I haven't really seen them do before.
A lot was made today about George Zimmerman using the word suspect when he was talking about Trayvon Martin. Let's listen to Doris Singleton talking to him about that.
When I headed back to my vehicle, it's as I headed back to my vehicle, the suspect emerged from the darkness and said, you got a problem. I said, no. The suspect said, you do now.
We're going to move on to page 3, but let me just stop you before you read that, and we're going to highlight, go ahead, the first part. Again, he uses the word suspect to refer to Trayvon Martin. Have you uttered those words, or have you informed him in any way that's the word he's supposed to use to refer to Trayvon Martin?
No.
Faith, I got to say, I didn't see what the big deal was about George Zimmerman using the word suspect. At that point, he didn't know his name. Trayvon Martin was, in Zimmerman's mind, according to his story, a suspect. Do you think there's much significance in that?
I actually do. I mean, there are a number of words he could have used to describe Trayvon besides suspect: young man, individual, person. But he chose to use suspect, and that's a window into his mind. In that same statement, he also said they usually get away. He assumed that Trayvon Martin was about to commit a crime or committing a crime, and he made that assumption wrongly. Trayvon Martin was not doing anything wrong, but he attached to him an attitude that he had towards other individuals who he'd previously seen in his neighborhood, who he thought they were suspicious and up to no good, and he made the same assumption about Trayvon. He said they usually get away. This time, however, he didn't, because he followed Trayvon.
Yamiche, I kept looking at George Zimmerman's story today, as we have in the past, looking for some possible reason for Trayvon Martin, an incentive for Trayvon Martin to do what George Zimmerman said he did. And it's hard to find it in Zimmerman's own account. I mean, this is the tragedy of not having Trayvon Martin here to tell his story, but it seems like that's a difficult moment for the jury to make sense of. Is why would Trayvon Martin turn around, according to George Zimmerman's story, and somehow find his way back to surprise the guy who's been following him, as someone who he didn't want following him?
I mean, I think that's a huge question that the jury is going to have to answer and have to deal with. Prosecutors today, when they were playing the tapes of George Zimmerman's statements to police, Doris Singleton says to Zimmerman, you know, you were following him. Do you think that Trayvon might have been scared of you? And why do you think he would do this? Zimmerman basically didn't really have a hard answer as to why he thought Trayvon would punch him in the nose. So I think the jury's really going to have to look at that and make their own decision. But both of these officers said that they believed George Zimmerman, that he didn't look like he had anger or ill will toward Trayvon Martin. So I think there's that double-edged sword, because the jury also heard from officers who say that this is a believable guy. So I think it's going to be a tough decision for them.
And in addition to that, Faith, there's just the very fact that George Zimmerman is fully cooperative with the police officers at every stage of their inquiry. He doesn't lawyer up. He doesn't seem to be, at that stage, concerned about his own liability.
Right, and Mark O'Mara has done a great job getting the maximum amount of usage out of these state witnesses. He cross-examined these officers, and he used that as an opportunity to show that George Zimmerman never asked for an attorney. He gave all of these statements voluntarily. When they asked him to come back to the police station, he showed up. There was no animus. There was no anger. He completely cooperated. They're going to get up and argue in summations. He did that because he had nothing to hide. He only shot Trayvon because that's what he had to do.
And Yamiche, as we go forward here, when you keep an eye on the jury, are there moments where you can tell they are more intensely engaged than others?
I think when they're listening to George Zimmerman, especially when they're watching him, they're really, really engaged. One juror today, I've talked about her before. Her name's E6. Well, we refer to her as E6. She's a woman who sits in the jury box, and she asked basically and said, I couldn't really hear all the interviews. I couldn't hear all the recordings. What are we going to do about that? And Judge Nelson said, you can take those into the deliberation room with you and listen to them then. So you have jurors that are really asking already for questions.
Yeah, Michelle Sindor and Faith Jenkins, thanks for joining us again tonight.
Thank you.